Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Monday, September 27th, 2021. And tonight we're going to be talking about enmeshment, one of those subjects that everybody loves to talk about and to ask questions about. And I'm really excited about talking about this principle tonight. There's an idea that I want to teach you about that I'll expand on as we go along this evening. In essence, one of the most primitive things that we teach our children, that we pass on to our children, and that was passed on to us is the idea of proximity to somebody else, how close or overlapping we are with somebody else. In essence, when psychologists or self help writers talk about marrying your mother or marrying your father, I think essentially what they're talking about is that there's something in that relationship that shares a similar quality with the person that raised you and that you're dating, courting, or marrying, and that characteristic is really how you understand the connection and separation to other people. When somebody is upset or angry or confused or hurt, how do you relate to that feeling? Do you take it on? Are you overwhelmed by it? Do you feel an impulse, an anxious impulse to fix it or to resolve it? Do you think that it's something that you need to address or change? That idea about how close or how we relate to other people is really, I think, what people are talking about when they say that you marry your mother and your father. Because on the surface, a lot of times when we describe that, we're talking about something very different. Somebody very different, I should say. Somebody who has different background, different characteristics, personality traits, different profession, and so forth and so on. But I think essentially it is, again, how we see and relate to that other person. I talk about this in my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, that the question needs to be changed, or most effectively can be changed to not what do I do to fix my child, but who am I? Who is my child? What's my relationship to them? And what's my relationship to their problems? Or I could take it one step farther and say to their feelings, to their experiences, to their successes, to them, to who they are and what they do. And so we learn about proximity to others through osmosis from our parents, right? We learn about it in the way that they react to our feelings, the way they react to our complaints, the way that they react to our desires, our asks of them. It can either be defensive or it can be placating or anywhere in between. But that way, that bond and how it shows up is essentially what we're seeking after for the rest of our lives. And so to make any kind of progress away from our family of origin programming into a more clear understanding of what it means to be connected to another person, we have to do a lot of work. I hope tonight's broadcast will give you some framework for that work. In a sense, I'm going to be talking a lot tonight about developing a self. Because as I say all the time, who you are, how clear you are about who you are, is the first ingredient and the best predictor about your ability to have a healthy relationship with another person. And I'll also say this at the outset. What I'm going to go through tonight isn't taught very often. Enmeshment is taught for sure. We hear that phrase all the time. We hear about boundaries and even a sense of self quite often. But the ideas that I'll present around enmeshment and what it means are very rarely taught. And that is, again, in my experience, my belief, it's because a lot of the people doing the teaching haven't done their work. They haven't figured out essentially what it means to be a person and to love or to relate to another person that we love. I've shared this before, but I debated the if I were going to name my book The Audacity to Be You, if I were going to name it something that really embodied what it was, I would have called it What It Means to Be a Person and to Love Another. And that's essentially, I think, what therapy teaches us or can teach us if we're willing to listen and to learn. From The Audacity to Be You, I wrote, it is common to conflate love This is a really important one. I think one of the most important paragraphs out of the book. It is common to conflate love or, quote, loving too much, unquote, with anxious attachment. Loving too much is a euphemism for the unhealed attachment wound and its expression in an anxious parent. The problem is not loving too much, but rather not enough self. So, in other words, when we try to get our needs met through the child, when we see the child as a reflection of us, when we see their successes as evidence of our good parenting, or their failures or their struggles as evidence of our failures as parenting, when we look at it through the simple lens of cause and effect, we're not really connected to the child. Do you know how, when we're talking about in difficult conversations about listening deeply and how important that is? Really, the barrier most often to listening deeply is that something is said or expressed by the other person that feels like an indictment on us, that feels like a criticism of us. Or even if we're undifferentiated, if we're really immature, even their healthy expression of a feeling feels to us like an ask or a criticism or a blame. That, in essence, is what enmeshment looks like. And our inability to listen means that we're no longer present with the other person, what they're feeling, what they're expressing, but we're really inside of ourselves. We have become triggered in those moments that I'm describing and are creating a rebuttal, a defense, a justification, something to ward off the threat that has been presented to us. So reactiveness to the other's being and feeling, reacting with strong moods of disappointment, anger. Those can all be evidences and signs that we are closer to the enmeshment end of the continuum than we are to the differentiated end of the continuum. And the goal, if you want to know the goal is to become a self. And if you want to know where to go, find an attachment-based therapist. If that's difficult for you to find, or it's too expensive, or maybe you're constrained by other resources or time, go to meetings like Al-Anon, like Codependence Anonymous, like Families Anonymous. Go to meetings where other people are talking about boundaries with other people, especially people who are self-sabotaging, who are living a self-destructive life. Because those kinds of relationships ask us more than other relationships to consider our position. Are we responsible? Are we to blame? Can we be of support? And so on. A couple of more quotes to begin. I shorten this down in the journey of the heroic parent, but because you're only allowed to use a certain number of lines oftentimes in music. But this is lyrics from The Wicked, the musical, specifically the song at the end of the first act. If you know me at all, you know I'm a huge Broadway fan. At the end of the first act, the name of the song is Defying Gravity. And Elphaba is being asked to lie, to collude with the wizard. If you don't know the show, it's going to be a little bit strange, but she's asked to kind of collude with the wizard. And with that, he will grant her acceptance. He will stand next to her and behind her and tell all of Oz to accept her. And this is what she's singing in a climactic moment in the song. She says, I'm through accepting limits because someone says they're so. Some things I cannot change, but if I try, I'll never know. And then this is the key. Too long I've been afraid of. Losing love, I guess I've lost. Well, if that's love, it comes at much too high a cost. And as silly as it is for me to bring in a musical from Broadway, I think it illustrates even more emphatically how common this challenge, this problem is of what does it mean to be a self, to be an individual. And then beyond that, as an individual, what does it look like? How are you with somebody else? I had a close friend this weekend shared with me as they're doing their work. He said to me, I don't know how to be with other people as I'm learning about myself and learning about my patterns and learning that so much of what I was taught or what was modeled for me and how to relate to people was had in it some pathology, some anxiety, some dependence. I don't know how to be after that. And all I said to him was, that's a great place to start, not knowing. What a wonderful place to start. Most people deny that there's an issue at all. Most people don't want to look at it. So the fact that you're in that kind of that moment, that space where you realize that you don't know how to be with other people, that's a really honest, authentic, and accurate assessment of yourself. And from The Dance of Anger, written by Harriet Lerner, my favorite book on boundaries, she says, many of our problems with anger occur when we choose between having a relationship and having a self. So again, at the outset of tonight's broadcast, talking about enmeshment, it's going to be about just as often about having a self as it will be about connection. Because when the connection asks or requires you, or anybody for that matter, to sacrifice essential, critical, important aspects of who they are, the sacrifice is too great. And in essence, the connection can't really be anything significant because without a self, it's impossible to connect. I drew a Venn diagram. I'm not sure how scientifically accurate this is, but this is the way that I understood the overlapping categories of anxiety, codependency, and enmeshment. Anxiety is kind of the biggest and broadest area. And anxiety is for sure present in a lot of codependency and in some enmeshment. And enmeshment and codependency overlap quite a bit. They're close to synonymous terms. And I'll talk about that as I define it and go along. If you've read my book, The Audacity to Be You, this is your oral presentation of one of the chapters. There are two of many founders of family therapy that I cite in this chapter where I talk about having boundaries, having relationships, being connected to other people. The first one I refer to is Salvador Minuchin. Salvador Minuchin is the father of structural family therapy. He literally wrote the book on family therapy, structural family therapy. And he described boundaries on a continuum. And at one end of the continuum is rigid boundaries. Somewhere in the middle, he called it clarity or clear boundaries. And on the other end of the continuum is diffuse boundaries. And he represented those by a solid line, a dashed line in the middle, and a dotted line on the other end of the continuum. And the style that people engage in correlated with these different levels of boundaries on the continuum. Rigid people with rigid boundaries tend to cut off, to lack empathy, to not be sensitive, to walk away, to be avoidant, to not take new information in, to not learn and grow. Everything is reactive and cut like it is with a sharp knife, right? Separated. Clear boundaries, of course, are healthy in the middle. And on the other side, he's the one that came up with the term enmeshment, Salvador Minuchin. Where there are diffuse boundaries, people are enmeshed. And that is, I don't know how to separate myself from what you feel or what you think. I don't know when you're upset, how much of that is about me and how much of it isn't. I don't know what I'm responsible for. I don't know how not to feel guilty when you're sad or angry, or to feel angry at you when you're angry at me, or to feel anxious when you're feeling anxious. I am reactive and dependent. Your mood, your feelings, your thoughts, your behavior have control over me. Your mood, your feelings, your thoughts, your behaviors, they predict my mood very well because my sense of self is overlapping with yours. When you're upset, it's about me. When you're happy, it's about me. When you fail, it's about me. When you struggle, it's mine to fix. I don't know how to sit with you and maintain a separate sense of self but still have a connection to you. Now, Mnuchin comes along at around the same time. A psychiatrist by the name of Murray Bowen, who was teaching at the Department of Psychiatry, I think at George Washington University, although I'm not positive. It was one of the universities in Washington, D.C. He had a competing model. And he said on one side of the continuum, we'll place a zero, the number zero. And on the other hand, on the other side of the continuum, we'll have 100. These are all theoretical ideas. And he said, as we go along that continuum from 0 to 100, we become more differentiated. And this is the contribution he made to the idea that we're talking about tonight. He said fusion, that was his word for enmeshment, and disengagement, that was his term that was synonymous with Dr. Mnuchin's term of cutoff. Fusion and enmeshment, disengagement and cutoff are all the same problem, the same issue, the same lack of differentiation. And what separates them not is their quality internally, but the style in responding to them. Somebody that's really reactive and aggressive and violent and controlling, right? That's one style, versus somebody who's dependent and extra needy and reliant on somebody else for their mood or even their care for self. Those look very differently, but in essence, he said, those are all a lack of differentiation, a lack of clarity. Like the one young woman that I was dealing with years ago, when she said that if she told her father the truth during graduation, if she told her father the truth about how she felt about drugs and alcohol, going home, that he would freak out, that he would walk away immediately, which he did, by the way. She predicted accurately. And when she predicted this, I said to her, it sounds like your dad is very fragile. And she's like, fragile is not the word that I would use to describe my father. And I said, I know it looks tough. I know he looks like he has a rough, kind of cold exterior, and we don't associate those attributes with fragile or fragility. But his inability to stay present, to work through feelings, to hear feelings, is his fragileness. His style of cutoff, of pulling away, of presenting with an emotional sense of I don't care about you anymore. That's all just a way of not being able to deal with a real relationship. And of course, on the other side of the continuum, somebody that's much more dependent, emotional, and anxious, has the same challenges and difficulties. Now, imagine this continuum of differentiation. Differentiation, you can think of it as a perfect balance of self and other. Neither one of those two aspects, dynamics, compromise the other, and the person is fully allowed to be themselves and also be present and compassionate and loving and connected to other people. Okay? So that's 100. If you imagine that ideal, and 0 is the opposite. And what Dr. Bowen talked about was when we are raised in a family, let's say that our parents are somewhere on this differentiation scale, let's say a 65, just to pick a number arbitrarily. What he suggests, because the parents are a 65, that's how they relate to each other, that all the children and everybody in that family is going to be around a 65, right? Somewhere, theoretically speaking, between a 60 and a 70. They might look very different, but essentially, that's the kind of teaching that goes on. We pass on levels of differentiation to our children by the way that we are unconsciously all the time, every moment. And so, if you happen to be a 63 or a 67, when you go out in the world, you look for people around a 67. If you're a 65, I have written on here on the screen for those of you watching live, if you're a 65, you want somebody between a 60 and a 70, because 40s don't make sense to you. And neither do 90s. You're just as repelled by 90s as you are by 40s. Now, 40s look immature, right? Unevolved, unenlightened, aggressive, needy, dependent, volatile, chaotic, right? That's what 40s look like to a 65. But 65s, I ask the question all the time in parent groups, what does a 90 look like to a 65? And the answer is, to a 65, a 90 looks like they don't care. Because to a 65, if you really loved me, you would get in the mix with me. You would return my call faster. You wouldn't let my text hang out there. You would sacrifice your own self-care for me because that's what 65s do. We make bigger compromises when we're 65 than we do when we're 90 of our own self. We give up what we need. We don't even know what we need when we're 65. And so 90s look like they don't care, or look like they're selfish, or look like they don't have love in them, or look like they don't have empathy, because they're not expressing love in the way that our family fundamentally showed love, which is by compromising yourself to some large degree. I was teaching this at a parent support group some years ago, and I was describing this, and somebody asked me the question. I thought it was a very insightful question. They said, well, if we make progress, and you can make progress up this scale, right? That's the goal of doing your work. You become more and more differentiated, which means more and more loving and more authentic. Right? Those are the two ideas that lead us to make progress, right? That we embody as we make progress. So somebody at a New York City parent support group asked, but let's say if you're a 90, shouldn't you explain to the 70s in your life how you've changed and what's going on and what's different? And I said to the person asking the question, I said, the thing about 90s is they don't explain themselves. 90s do not explain themselves to people. You might once or twice simply say, I love you, but I can't give that to you. Or I love you, but I'm not willing to give you this money, or I'm not willing to let you live with me, or whatever the boundary is that you set. But you don't go out of your way to make 70s understand. That's what 70s do. And of course, 50s and 40s, that's all they do is explain themselves to everybody. And they ask everybody to be like them. But the 90s okay being alone, because the 90s sense of well-being is not dependent on who they keep company with. The 90 and their sense of well-being is because they have an internalized sense of themselves. That even if a marriage or a friendship falls apart, or even if a child who threatens to stop loving you, in fact, does stop loving you, the 90 maintains a sense of serenity and well-being because they're carrying around a sense of okayness, of enoughness inside of them that's independent of other people. It's independent of other people's reactions. Differentiation is the distance and losing yourself in the presence of the other. Right? When you lose yourself, I talk about it in families that there's a kind of a gravitational pull around all of us. The less differentiated you are, the greater the gravitational pull. I want you into me or like me, or to think and be like me, to do what I want. Differentiation is the extent to which we're able to say, I'm not going to be pulled into that. I'm not going to be compromised. I'm not going to give you what you want to prove to you that I love you. I'm not going to give you what you're asking for to prove to you that I'm not abandoning you, or that I'm a good father, a good mother, a good husband, good wife, good friend. In contrast, low differentiated folks, they prioritize the relationship over the sense of self. If you tell me I don't love you and the only way I can prove it is by giving in another time, I will give in another time because I need to be seen as somebody who loves. So I have to do this because how I see myself is dependent upon how you see me. Differentiation is about finding your voice and keeping it. It's about being who you are. It's about, to some extent, being decisive, but still open to learning and growing. I talk about this all the time, and you've heard me say this virtually on every podcast. The first ingredient in differentiation and in intimate relationships is a sense of self. You can only be intimate with somebody to the extent that you are a whole person. And to the extent that you're not a whole person, that limits your connection to other people. By definition, if I have two objects, right, and I'm trying to connect them, if one object doesn't exist at all or it's crumbling in my hand, I can't really connect it to the other. But if it has integrity and solid, they can be connected. They can touch. The first ingredient in connection and intimacy with your child and with your spouse is you being a self. And being a self means doing all of the work to heal and address, to be aware of, to own your trauma that's happened throughout your life. And everybody has some. Like I talked about, there are stylistic differences between anxious enmeshment and rigid enmeshment, what I call rigid enmeshment. They look different. One has a more masculine feel to it, one has a more feminine feel to it. But essentially, they're the lack of self and healthy intimacy that comes out of that lack of self. Being over involved and over identified. In The Journey of the Heroic Parent, I wrote, over identification. Over identification is the most severe form of poor attachment. Over identification doesn't see the child as an other, but rather sees the child as an extension or a reflection of the parent. So they've lost their individuality because I am you and you are me. And I can't see your needs and your feelings because I'm too busy seeing my projections onto you and into you. Over identification doesn't see the child as another, but rather sees the child as an extension or reflection of the parent. In such a relationship dynamic, there is only one person, the parent. The child is altogether missing. And I wrote this because I've heard people talk about over-identification and over-identification and over-involvement as like I said in the beginning of this broadcast, too much love, caring too much. You can't love too much because love it's like being too healthy. By definition, you can't be too healthy because then you would be unhealthy. You can't love too much because then it's not love. And so we learn to love, we learn to be present, we learn to maintain a sense of self, we learn to distinguish the difference, to not be reactive, to be able to sit in and maintain a connection even when there's distress and volatile feelings. It's important as you understand this idea about enmeshment that loving somebody and needing somebody are not the same thing. It's one of the most common things that I see in relationships, that spouses think needing each other is some kind of high form of love, or needing a child is loving them. And it's simply not. Needing isn't bad or wrong, it's just not love. And so when parents talk to me about, I need my child to love me, I don't want them to abandon me, I want them to see me as a fair parent, I want them to know that I love them, all these things that are really the child's responsibility for figuring out, the parent needs that and confuses that need with love, with connection. In essence, when you're needing that from your child, you're asking your child to do something for you that your parents were supposed to do for you, to give you a sense of self based in that resonance, that healthy connection. We have to learn as we come out of enmeshment, we have to learn to take care of ourselves. Ultimately and clearly, you're responsible for your happiness and serenity. As is said in Al Anon, your serenity is your responsibility. My serenity is my responsibility. I'm responsible for my happiness, and you're responsible for yours. But somewhere along the way, because of enmeshment, we were taught that my job is to make my wife happy and her job is to make me happy. That is a recipe for disaster and resentment and abdication of our responsibility ultimately. And that leads to us begging, pleading, arguing, debating, punishing, attacking, threatening, leveraging to try to get the other person to take care of our needs because we don't know that it's our job to do it. I won't get into the details because it's complicated, but I will tell you I have been in an abusive relationship before for a long time. And I tried everything, and it wasn't a spouse. I tried everything to get this person to love me. I tried to be good. I tried to fight with them. I tried to recruit other people into the relationship who would stand behind me and show the other person that they were being unkind and abusive. I complained about this dynamic for years and years and years with my therapist until I finally accepted the realization that it's my job to make me happy. And I'm going to have to set, establish, and follow through on boundaries. I'm going to experience some loss, but in that process, I'll gain something more important, which is a sense of self-respect, a sense of stability that comes from taking care of and valuing myself. It's very important that we understand what our needs are and what other people's needs are. I say this in the audacity to be you. The difference between me and you is that I'm not you. Everything else will make a lot more sense after that. And in order to understand somebody, you have to lose your mind. You have to see the world through their eyes. I am so much better today in 2021 than I was 10 years ago at sitting with people and seeing them. And that's a direct result of the work that I have worked on my own differentiation. And I want to be seen. I don't want to be corrected or taught unless I ask. I don't want to be confronted or punished or shamed or nagged. I want to be seen. And if you can't do that, that's okay. I'm not going to spend my life trying to change you and get you to do it. I'm going to go somewhere else. So it's really important that we understand what we need and what other people needs and to be able to see those. It's very important, I've talked about this recently, that we don't equate praise and love. They're not the same thing. And yet I think we parents, we confuse them so often. And our children learn from our confusion to equate the two. They can't tell the difference between praise and affection because we don't really distinguish between the two. The fact of the matter is, if you're like me, and most of you are like me in this way, you love your children more than anybody on the planet. That's okay. It's wonderful. And what that love asks of you is to do your work and to figure yourself out and to work on your trauma and subsequently, after all of that, to be able to see them, to maintain your boundaries, but see them through the compassionate, curious lens. Praise is not love. Praise is not affection. I hear parents talk all the time, especially in our program, about how their children's empathic muscle is broken, right? Oftentimes, people who display a significant lack of empathy and sensitivity to others, they seem cold or they are cold and callous and even abusive. It is because of shame and guilt often. It is because they are so overwhelmed. Our children more often than not just want to please us so they can be accepted and feel safe in the world. And the more anxious the attachment or avoidant the attachment, depending upon the style, the more overwhelmingly terrifying it is that they're going to be alone. And so they just want to beat us to the punch. They're going to sink their own boat before we sink it for them. So I'd rather light the house on fire than try to keep it clean and to your standards and fail at it. Because at least if I set it on fire, I'm in control. It's why I've tried since my first son, when my children are struggling, not to talk about wilderness therapy with them, not to threaten it. Because what I learned from my firstborn son is eventually he just said, screw it. The fear and trepidation and anxiety about being sent to wilderness for years, as I thought I jokingly threatened it, the pressure was so much, he just blew it all up. And that gave him a sense of that he was in control of things. So sometimes a lack of empathy is because of overwhelming pressure of shame or guilt or fear of disappointment or rejection. It looks like they don't care. But in essence, the not caring is itself the symptom that reinforces the rule that we're all connected and that we do care. Turning a child into an object, we all do this. It's one of the things I have most confidence in as a parent educator and parent coach, that everybody to some extent sees their children as a reflection of themselves. If my child gets into an Ivy League school and gets married and has 3 children and a cat and a dog, then I did a good job. And that is inherent in our culture. And while I preach accountability and courage for parents to parents, that equating the child's success as your own success is turning the child into an object. That's what the story of Midas is about, the golden touch, is that everything he touches turns into something of intrinsic golden value, turns into gold. But what is lost in that eventually is the connection, the interaction. Turning our children into a mirror, to our report card, is to turn them into a thing, into an object, to not give them the credit of their own sense of self, their own selfhood, their own choice. It's really about learning to listen and hear people, and our ability to do that is based on our own self-security. I love the exercise that we do at the intensives called the 3 circles, where we divide ourselves and relationships into 3 separate circles. The first circle is you. And in that circle, you have 2 primary jobs: to know your truth and to keep people out of your circle. So when someone tries to come in and tell you what you should think and feel and do, you say, I appreciate your interest in my well-being, but I'm not interested in you taking over my life. And they have the same responsibility in their circle, to know their truth and to keep people out of their circle. And you each have a responsibility not to get in the other person's circle. So you see, you can set boundaries with your children, with your spouse, with your friends, with your colleagues, with your family of origin. And then they can choose how to deal with it. They can choose if they want to stay. And of course, you don't set a boundary with every little thing. Like if you wear red shirts, I don't like the color red, so we can't be friends. If I'm on the other side of that equation, I say that's too tight, too precarious of a tightrope for me to walk on. I need to be able to be human. But if I'm constantly lecturing you, excuse me, excuse me. If I might have to get water. Just a second. Malia, we'll have to cut this out of the podcast. Never had to walk away for that before. So we decide what's principally important to us, what we can't give up and what we can. Of course, you need to compromise. And then I hear people ask the question, but how much is too much, and how much is not enough? And that's your life's work. That's what it means to be a person, to be a self. All relationships require some compromise. And so, are you a doormat or a dictator? That's your life's work, to figure out what's too much and what's not enough. And the middle circle in this 3-circle exercise is where you meet, where you express needs, where you express feelings, where you ask for things, where you offer things. And so we don't tell our spouse or even our child, you have to quit using drugs, or you have to quit drinking, or quit swearing, or you have to go to church on Sundays or Saturdays. You have to go to the synagogue on Saturdays. We don't tell them in this model what they should do. We say, here's what I'm going to do. You can choose. And then from there, we work it out. I can't have alcohol in my house, or I can have it, but if you're drunk, I'm going to walk in the other room. You can keep drinking, but I'm leaving. Or you can keep drinking, but if it invades my personal space, I'm going to take space. So we don't control other people. We just set our boundaries. Even your children, even in sending them to evoke, there still is in that process the idea that they don't have to learn. They don't have to grow. They don't have to change. But your boundary is your boundary. For we people who struggle with codependency and enmeshment, it is our empathy, our overwhelming ability to read and feel other people, and our inability to keep separate from those feelings, which I'll call empathy, that robs us of our boundaries. People that I hear it all the time with parents and children, or even partners. It's as if I understood that he is in part acting out because our divorce was so ugly, therefore I can't hold boundaries. Or because I've made mistakes, I can't hold boundaries. Or because I can see that he's wounded from his mother or his father, or that she's compromised because she's suffering from anxiety, then I can't have boundaries. When we talk about growing on the scale from enmeshed to differentiated, we have empathy and compassion, and we have clear boundaries. And the two don't compete with each other. They find an agreement. When parents understand, this is from Siegel and Hartzell, Parenting from the Inside Out. When parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them. Listen to that. That's a genius sentence. When parents understand that they can let their children have and express their desires without having to fulfill them, it frees the parent to make a connection to the child's experience without having to deny their feelings. That ability to let others in our lives, to let our children, to let our friends have their feelings, and for us to sit with them, to manage our own reactions to it so that we don't act out on them. That's essentially what the practice of psychotherapy is. You know, if you're my client, I don't, and you express sadness or grief or insecurity or social anxiety, or I don't tell you how to fix it, at least not right away, unless we do some problem solving later. I first want to understand it. I want to understand how it served you, where it came from, how you got there, what's the trauma beneath the symptom or the issue. Can we give that some light and some air and help that to heal? And then after all of that, maybe we can work on some skills or some tools to manage your emotional experience of life. But I don't go to fixing. When you come to me and say, my husband doesn't listen, my mother is always nagging, my father's never there, my inclination isn't to say, well, have you tried this or have you tried that? My inclination now, because of my training and because of the work that I've done on codependency and enmeshment, is to say, thanks for talking about it. Tell me some more. Tell me about it. I want to hear about it. And it's in that connection, that real connection, not the pseudo connection that comes when we give advice or justify ourselves or argue or debate. When it comes from real connection, that's where the healing occurs. And we have so little of that in our lives, so little experience with that kind of connection. I will tell you this, and maybe this is one of the most important things to tell you of anything that I tell you. As you or when you get healthier with your boundaries, your children and others will accuse you of abandoning them. When you get healthy with boundaries, you'll be accused of being selfish, of abandoning, of not caring, and even not loving. If you truly loved me, you couldn't stand by and watch me suffer. When in reality, it takes great courage and great love to sit with somebody that we care about and watch them suffer and not try to fix it and not try to run away. As an adult man who's working on all of this, I don't allow people in my life to spend a significant amount of time in my life with people that are trying to fix me, shape me up in the way that they think I need to be shaped up. And by the way, that doesn't mean that I'm not growing or learning or open to new ideas. It just means I don't need that anxiety in my life because it's not about me. It's about your inability to see yourself and to relate to me in a healthy way. From The Dance of Anger again by Harriet Lerner. No matter how long, this is about a woman who was taking care of her father, who required more and more of her time in caregiving. And this is a grown woman who had a family of her own. And she said, no matter how long I'm in therapy, no matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no to my father. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So if I'm going to change, I guess I will just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. See, there is often no way out of resentment. People ask me all the time, what do I say? What do I do? How do I hold boundaries? And essentially what I say is you have to be willing to confront, to feel bad, to feel guilt, and to look into, I use this my hand kind of in front of my face as a visual reminder. You have to be willing to look into the face of the monster that's telling you that you're a failure of a wife, the failure of a mother or a father or husband or friend or coworker. You have to be willing to sit with that monster and make peace with it and realize what a lie it is and how your own family of origin programming breathed life into that monster, created that monster, and we have to let it go. Some say we have to kill it. I like to think of it as we have to make friends with it. That's what it means to love your horrible, rotten self. So we're held hostage by guilt because our empathy robs us of our boundaries. We end up becoming resentful instead of setting healthy boundaries. Resentment is a really good indication that you're not taking care of yourself, that you're abdicating that responsibility to somebody else, and they're doing a really bad job of it. I say to parents all the time, not only is it inappropriate for your children to take care of you, to believe it's their job and act as if it's their job to make you happy and feel good. Not only is that not their job, not only does that come at great cost to who they are, but the idea that they're supposed to take care of you is ridiculous because they're incapable of taking care of you. They're not designed to take care of you. They were never meant to take care of you. It was never their job. And frankly, they're horrible at it. And so we have to learn, all of you listening to me, all of you watching live tonight, we have to learn to take care of ourselves. And we have to learn to grapple with the guilt and the shame that comes with healthy self-care. Because if you're not feeling guilty, you're probably not increasing or improving your self-care. Because that's the barrier. And your ideas of what it means to love, to overextend yourself, to ask 3 times if it's okay if you set a boundary, to apologize for things you don't need to, all that extra stuff that you're doing to try to make the other person, placating and people pleasing is manipulation. I didn't say that during the manipulation webinar, but people pleasing is an inauthentic manipulation of others. It's exactly what Elphaba in the musical Wicked that I was quoting earlier was saying. If this is love, it comes at much too high a cost. It comes at the cost of my values and my sense of self and my self-care. So if you're feeling resentment, it can be and is often a good indication that you're not taking care of yourself and that you're expecting somebody else to take care of you. Begging, pleading, lecturing, yelling, threatening, debating, guilting, hoping, cutting off are all substitutes for healthy selfhood, differentiation, and the subsequent ability to connect to others. Harriet Lerner goes on to say in The Dance of Anger, anger is a tool for change when it challenges us to become less of an expert on others and more of an expert on the self. So you're angry at your spouse, you're angry at your friends, you're angry at your boss, you're angry at your child. That's an invitation to get more clear on your boundaries and your limits. Not to try to get them, like I described earlier in my unhealthy relationships, not to get them to change so that you're taken care of, but to take care of yourself. And then when you start taking care of yourself, you start to see that the people that are willing to respond and capable of responding in kind, those people stick around or show up and stick around. And the people that expect you to give up yourself, to prove your love, to prove that you care, those people fall away, disappear from our lives. We project onto our children and then try to heal our wounds by parenting them and giving them what we didn't need, right? We see in them, we over-identify with them. We don't see them. We try to listen. We try not to become autocratic. We try not to punish because those are the things that hurt us that we haven't sorted out. So we don't see them. We see us in them. And we start to try to parent us the way we wanted to be parented, or the way that we imagined we wanted to be parented. The work of seeing an other clearly is almost completely dependent on how well you see yourself. And that means all that you feel, think, what your drives are, what your trauma is, the messages and the roles from your family of origin, how you treated anger in your family of origin, how you treated failure in your family of origin, all of that. I tell our staff all the time, if you're not able to set boundaries with the students, it's often because you're trying not to be your authoritarian or autocratic parent. who you thought didn't see and listen to you. So the only way you can be a seeing and listening parent is by not having too many rules or boundaries. You see? This enmeshment, this differentiation, it's in the unconsciousness of the family. Like I said, expecting others to take care of us is an abdication of our responsibility. And then we do for others, we treat others, and then we accept them to reciprocate. Most people that are codependent or enmeshed end up being resentful because they say, I don't treat them that way. I wouldn't treat somebody that way. If somebody was over in a corner crying, I would go and offer them a tissue. So why isn't everybody doing that to me? Right? We project onto them our own lack of differentiation and judge them accordingly. As we set boundaries, as we make progress, people are going to try to drag us down. As you get healthier, the people in your life that you love and that love you are going to struggle a little bit with the adjustment. Period. It's just nobody likes a boundary. Boundaries, you will not be celebrated for having healthier boundaries. You will be vilified. You'll be called names. And what Harriet Lerner calls these attempts is what she calls change back messages. It's a good idea to prepare for the pushback and to role play it or to talk it out with somebody, a sponsor, a therapist, a friend that you trust. Healthy boundaries feel scary, cold, formal, and wrong. You actually, to get healthier, have to do things that make you feel like you're a bad human being. Isn't that crazy? But so obviously true. To get healthier, you have to do things that you've been taught are wrong or not the right way to love or to be with somebody. Differentiation is the balance between self and other. And neither is required to sacrifice core elements for the other. That's why, you guys, it's so important as you find parent coaches and clients and even evoke therapists and your children also. It's so important that when you speak difficult truths to authority figures, and therapists are authority figures, and maybe in some ways emotionally the kind of most the rawest form of an authority figure, that when you speak the truth or when your children speak the truth to authority figures, that it be welcomed by the authority figure. That when you get mad at me, that I honor the courage it took to get mad at me. That when you express that I've hurt your feelings, that I didn't see you, that I shamed you in some way, and you tell me that, that's why when they write you an impact letter and tell you how you hurt them, that's the opportunity, the moment to do it differently. And I don't know how to do it alone. I know people talk about meditation as a pathway for this kind of work, and I think that that's an important part of a lot of people's work, including mine. I think you need to do it with somebody else. See, we're social beings. We develop a sense of self by how others think and feel about us, principally our parents. And not just the good or the smart or the handsome or the pretty or the successful parts, but all of us. The cure, if you will, the cure to what ails us is to be seen as a whole person. And that the parts that you think are ugly or hideous or unacceptable or repulsive, to have those seen with compassion and understanding is to heal. And so self-esteem is not an inside job. And when we tell others or our children, just pick yourself up from your bootstraps, you shouldn't worry what other people think of you, it's so insidiously abusive to say those things. Instead, what we say is, you've got to find somebody, at least one person, who can see all of you When you walk into that Al-Anon meeting and you talk about your horrible, rotten self, or the AA meeting, the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, or the therapy session, and you confess to the dark, ugly parts of who you are, and the person sitting across from you says, "You're in the right place. You're welcome here." Or in the case of a 12-step meeting, they might even say something humorously like, "Oh, that ain't nothing. Wait till I tell you my story. Then you'll really know what a depraved individual is." It's that grace that heals us. It's the bishop in Les Miserables who gave Jean Valjean the candlesticks. That's the moment in the heroic journey where we consider something for the first time, something we've never given ourselves permission to consider, which is we might just be okay as we are. Our imperfect, flawed, fallible, at times ridiculous and idiotic self might be enough. And other people's reaction to us might be about them and not about us. Right? That's what happens when we have this either attachment experience of being welcomed and honored and celebrated, or we have what we call an earned attachment, which means that we do the work later in life, oftentimes in relationship to an adequate therapist or mentor or sponsor or a wise friend. The goal is to see yourself. And when you can see yourself, all of you can so easily see other people. When the knight from the Knight in Rusty Armor asked Merlin the magician if he could read minds, Merlin responded, "Since I know myself, I know you." That is the silver bullet. Your work is the silver bullet. Your awareness is the silver bullet. It's the closest thing to a silver bullet, is you healing your trauma and doing your work. All right, looks like I don't have any questions that we've already gone over, so I'll answer any questions in the upcoming meeting. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are on Amazon, also on Audible. I read the Audacity to Be You. We have support groups for wilderness families and for intensive alumni. So if you are current or an alumni wilderness family, September 30th at 6:30 p.m. is for you. If you are an alumni family and you want an alumni only meeting, September 28th, that's tomorrow night. In fact, Travis Slagle, our clinical director from the intensives program, will be running that. So that's a special treat. 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. And then, of course, intensives alumni. The next available meeting is October 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. You can find out more about these, find out the schedule by going to our website or emailing malia@evoketherapy.com. For our intensive program, we have one spot left in our in-person October 20th Finding You, and also one spot left in our October 6th Returning to You. So if you've gone to a Finding You and you want to come back, that's what the Returning to You program. These are the best programs, the best thing that I know that you can do to add to your child's healing. If you won't do it for yourself, and oftentimes we parents won't do it for ourselves, you can do it for your children. You can also do this online. Our next online offering is November 5th through 7th. It's half the price, half the time, a lot less cost because you're not traveling. It's over a weekend, and we do it in two parts, part 1 and part 2. So November 5th is a part 1. Contact intensives@evoketherapy.com if you want attachment-based coaching. And that's essentially what I teach, attachment-based therapy, attachment-based theory. You can contact coaching@evoketherapy.com. Therapists from our wilderness program, therapists from our intensives, other coaches from across the country who work on the Evoke model will be available. So contact coaching@evoketherapy.com. Excuse me. I'm going to lose my voice again. Let me take a moment. All right. Malia, we have to delete those out for the podcast. We have pursuits adventure trips for families and young adults, anywhere from 3 to 30 days. You can do this after a program, between programs. You can do it to reconnect, or if you don't think you need a full immersion as a family, or your child doesn't need a full immersion into a deeply therapeutic process, pursuits trips are a great option. Excuse me, I'm so sorry about that. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. Just go to your favorite podcast app on your phone and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast, or go to soundcloud.com. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us by searching for us using the handle at Evoke Therapy or at Dr. Brad Reedy. And on Instagram, you can find us by searching also at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, we have a blog with new content each week, um, wonderfully curated by Malia, who also is our host this evening. So go to our website and check out our blog for new content each week. My next broadcast will be a live Q&A. So any questions that have come in tonight or that are sent in to webinar at evoketherapy.com, or any live questions that you have on Wednesday evening, I'll be addressing September 29th, Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. That's the next broadcast. Again, as always, thank you for on behalf of the people that you love for being willing to do your work, because that's how it works. I hope this is a helpful point of contact, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.